Consolata Melis woke up at 5 in the morning. She was 108 years old. She walked to her kitchen in Perdas de Fogu, a mountain village in the interior of Sardinia, and she did what she had done every morning for a century. She checked her lievito madre, the mother dough fermenting in a clay bowl on the counter, pressed it gently with one finger to feel if it was ready, and began shaping her bread for the day. Her hands moved without thinking. This was not a wellness ritual. This was just Tuesday. Consolata was part of a family that, in 2012, broke the Guinness World Record for the highest combined age of any living siblings. 9 brothers and sisters. Combined age, 818 years. They came from the same village. They ate the same food. And nearly every single day of those combined centuries of life, they ate bread made the way their mother taught them, and her mother before her, slowly fermented, long risen, deeply alive. Now think about the person you know who has been told they're gluten intolerant, or the one managing blood sugar spikes after every meal, or the one who switched to gluten-free bread and feels no better and spends twice as much. In America right now, somewhere between 6 and 10% of the population has been told to avoid wheat. The gluten-free market hit $7.5 billion last year, and yet the longest-lived people on Earth, with extraordinarily low rates of cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, and dementia, eat bread every day. Something is not adding up, and at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you the one thing Consolata did every morning that has nothing to do with food, a practice so simple that the researchers almost cut it from the study entirely. Stay for that. It reframes everything. I spent a long time in the research on this one. Let me show you what I found. The Barbagia region of Sardinia, specifically the Nuoro province, has nearly 10 times more centenarians per capita than the United States. But here's the detail that stops researchers cold. In the rest of the world, for every man who lives to 100, there are 4 to 5 women. In Nuoro, the ratio is 1 to 1. Men are living just as long as women. That is almost unheard of in the longevity literature, and it is not genetic. It is behavioral. It is environmental. It is the daily practice of specific people in a specific place eating specific food prepared in a specific way. You've been told that gluten is the problem, that wheat is inflammatory, that if you have bloating, brain fog, or unstable blood sugar, eliminating bread is the answer. That logic sounds reasonable. It's wrong. Or at least, it's incomplete in a way that's costing people their health and a significant amount of money. Here's what the research actually shows. In 2004, a team at the University of Bari, Decode and colleagues, published a landmark paper in Applied and Environmental Microbiology. They were looking at traditional long-fermented sourdough breads and what happens to gluten during the fermentation process. What they found was this. The lactobacilli bacteria that live in a wild sourdough culture produce lactic acid as they eat the sugars in the flour. That acid drops the pH of the dough, and that acidic environment activates enzymes called proteases, which begin to literally pre-digest the gliadin peptides in the wheat, the precise protein structures that trigger inflammation and intolerance in the gut. The gluten doesn't disappear entirely, but its structure is fundamentally altered. It becomes something the human digestive system can process in a way that a 90-minute commercial loaf never could. Then in 2008, researchers at the University of Sassari, right there in Sardinia, the same university that produced the first major study of Sardinian longevity, measured the glycemic response to sourdough versus standard bread, published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. The result? Genuine slow-fermented sourdough produces a glycemic index of around 53. Commercial white bread sits at 71 to 75. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between a food that stabilizes your blood sugar and a food that spikes it and sends you crashing 2 hours later. The American gluten-free industry largely missed this. The vast majority of commercial gluten-free breads replace wheat with refined potato starch, tapioca starch, and xanthan gum, highly processed ingredients with glycemic indexes that are often higher than the wheat they replaced. You are paying $6 to $9 for a loaf of bread that is actively harder on your blood sugar than the original. Meanwhile, a loaf of genuine slow-fermented sourdough made at home costs about $1.50 in raw materials. Consolata's family did not have a supplement cabinet. They had a kitchen, a clay bowl, and time. There are 3 things happening in the Sardinian sourdough method that work together. 3 biological mechanisms that explain why this bread does something modern bread cannot. The first is gluten predigestion through long fermentation. The second is the near-total elimination of FODMAPs, the fermentable carbohydrates in wheat that cause bloating and IBS symptoms. And the third is the low glycemic metabolic response that comes from eating bread the way wheat was always meant to be eaten. These are not separate benefits. They are one system. Let me walk you through each one. The foundation is time. That is the thing modern bread production eliminated, and the thing Sardinian bread never gave up. Consolata's lievito madre, her mother dough, was not a packet of commercial yeast from a store. It was a living culture of wild yeast and lactobacilli bacteria that her family had maintained for years, fed daily with flour and water, alive with microbial activity. When she mixed her dough, she was not starting a 2-hour process. She was starting a 24 to 48-hour process, often finishing with a long cold fermentation in a cool part of the house. During that entire window, the bacteria were working, eating the sugars, acidifying the dough, breaking down the gliadin, transforming the bread at a molecular level. A second study from the University of Bari, Rizzello and colleagues, published in Nutrients in 2019, ran clinical trials comparing sourdough fermented for 24 hours against bread made with commercial baker's yeast. Participants eating the long-fermented sourdough showed significantly faster gastric emptying and substantially less gastrointestinal discomfort. The gut processed it differently because the bread arrived in the gut differently, already partially broken down, its most problematic compounds already metabolized by the bacteria before it ever reached the human digestive system. And then there is the FODMAP question. Research published in the Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology in 2017 found that sourdough fermentation reduces the fructan content of wheat by over 90%. Fructans are the fermentable carbohydrates that cause the bloating, cramping, and IBS symptoms that millions of people experience when they eat modern bread. They are not caused by gluten. They are caused by these unfermented carbohydrates arriving intact in the gut. Long sourdough fermentation almost entirely eliminates them. The bacteria eat them first. What the Sardinian shepherds had, without knowing the mechanism, was a bread that pre-digested itself. They ate it at nearly every meal. Antonio Taude, a shepherd from the village of Tiana, who was officially recognized by Guinness World Records as the oldest man in the world in 2001 at age 112, walked miles daily across the steep mountain terrain of Nuoro and ate a diet built on local minestrone, sourdough bread, and a daily glass of Cananao wine. When someone asked him his secret, he said simply, "Love your brother and drink a good glass of red wine every day." The bread was not a secret to him. It was just food. The right food, made the right way. Here is how you replicate this. You need a sourdough starter, a living wild culture. You can buy one online for about $15, or go to an artisanal bakery and ask for a small portion of their starter, which most will give you for free. Feed it flour and water daily until it is active and bubbly. Then, 500 grams of organic stone ground flour, einkorn or durum wheat preferred, both of which have different gluten structures than modern hybridized wheat varieties, 350 grams of water, 10 grams of salt, 100 grams of active starter. Mix it together and let it bulk ferment at room temperature for 8 to 12 hours. Then shape the dough, place it in a covered bowl or proofing basket, and put it in the refrigerator for 24 to 48 hours. That cold fermentation step is where the majority of the gluten degradation occurs. Then bake it in a Dutch oven preheated to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. The most common mistake. People bake sourdough on a weekend, feel good about it, and then buy whatever bread is at the grocery store the other 6 days of the week. The Sardinian practice is not occasional. It is daily. Consolata did not make sourdough as a project. She maintained her starter as a living household practice the way someone else might tend a garden. The consistency is the protocol. One thing I want to be direct about. If you have diagnosed celiac disease, this is not a cure. Celiac is an autoimmune condition, and the gluten degradation in traditional sourdough, while substantial, does not make wheat safe for someone with celiac. This conversation is about the epidemic of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, IBS, blood sugar dysregulation, and the bloating and inflammation that most people with these issues experience, and which the research shows is dramatically reduced by proper long fermentation. What we do in the West is worth naming plainly. We spend $7.5 billion on gluten-free products that are often more processed and more glycemically disruptive than the wheat they replaced. We buy bottles of digestive enzymes at $20 to $40 each, trying to compensate for a problem that traditional food preparation already solved. We eat bread made in 90 minutes with commercial yeast and wonder why our gut never settles. The contrast is not subtle. The shepherd in Nuoro spent pennies, baked once a day, and walked 5 to 7 miles across terrain so steep that the researchers who studied the region found a direct correlation between the steepness of the hills and the density of centenarians in those exact villages. They had a pharmacy in their kitchen, not a supplement cabinet. Now, I told you at the beginning that the researchers almost missed something, that there was a practice so simple it nearly got cut from the data. Here's what it was. When the Achaea study team, named for the Sardinian greeting meaning "May you live to be 100, began mapping the lifestyle variables of the Nuoro centenarians, they noted something that didn't fit neatly into a nutrition or exercise category. The elders were not in care homes. They were not peripheral to their families. They were central to them. Every generation lived together. The old men and women were consulted, deferred to, needed. They woke up each morning with a reason to wake up that came from other people, from a family that required their presence, their knowledge, their bread. The researchers almost didn't include this variable. It seemed too qualitative, too soft, too hard to quantify against blood panels and mortality data. They included it anyway, and when they ran the numbers, they found that the social integration of Sardinian elders, the specific way they remained woven into the daily life of their families, rather than being removed from it, was one of the most statistically significant variables in the entire data set. Chronic loneliness, the research now tells us, raises basal cortisol, suppresses the immune system, and acts as a stronger predictor of early mortality than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The Sardinian elders did not experience chronic loneliness. They experienced the opposite. They were indispensable. Consolata baked bread because her family needed the bread. She checked her lievito madre because it was hers to maintain. She woke up at 5 in the morning because there was a reason to. That is not a wellness practice. That is the structure of a life. The researchers almost missed it because it seemed too simple to be the answer. It is the answer. So here is the complete picture. Long fermented sourdough, made with a living starter and given 24 to 48 hours to work, pre-digests its own gluten, eliminates nearly all of the FODMAPs that cause bloating, and delivers a glycemic response that is genuinely low, around 53 on the index, compared to the 71 to 75 of commercial bread. Continuous, low-intensity movement across uneven terrain, not structured gym sessions, but daily life that requires the body to work, builds cardiovascular efficiency and bone density without the cortisol spike of high-intensity training, and deep, consistent integration into a community that needs you. That structure of genuine purpose keeps the biological machinery of aging running at a pace that medicine cannot fully explain and cannot yet replicate. In the first week, if you switch to genuine long-fermented sourdough as your primary bread, most people notice a reduction in the bloating and digestive discomfort they assumed was just their normal response to wheat. By 30 days, appetite and cravings begin to stabilize. The blood sugar swings that drive mid-afternoon hunger start to even out. At 90 days, it is worth asking your doctor for 3 blood markers: HS-CRP, which measures systemic inflammation, HbA1c, which shows your average blood sugar over 3 months, and fasting insulin. The centenarians of Nuoro did not monitor these numbers, but if you run them, you will likely see why their diet worked. And at 6 months, the shift is metabolic, not just digestive. The way your body processes carbohydrates begins to change when the carbohydrates you eat are not arriving as a processed spike, but as food that has already been partially transformed. This pattern does not belong only to Sardinia. The Okinawans ferment their foods. The Nicoyan women in Costa Rica nixtamalize their corn, an ancient process that chemically transforms the grain before it ever reaches the gut. The Icarians in Greece eat wild greens that feed the same gut bacteria that Sardinian sourdough cultivates. Across every blue zone, independently, populations that never spoke the same language arrived at the same insight. The transformation of food before it enters the body is the foundation of the system. They did not have a word for it. They had a practice. Consolata Melis baked bread every morning until nearly the end of her life. Not because she read a study, because that is what her mother did, and her mother's mother, in a village in the mountains of Sardinia, where people quietly, consistently, without drama or supplement stacks, lived to extraordinary age. This is not destiny. This is practice. Tonight, I want you to do one thing. Go online and order a sourdough starter. You can find them for $15 or less, or call an artisanal bakery near you tomorrow morning and ask if they'll give you a small portion of theirs. That is day one. That is the beginning of the system. You are not buying a product. You are starting a practice. Every week on this channel, I go this deep into one complete Blue Zone protocol, the real research, the real centenarians, the real mechanisms. If that is what you are looking for, subscribe. You won't miss a single one. And before you go, try this right now. Stand up from wherever you are sitting. Now lower yourself to the floor and stand back up without using your hands. The shepherds of Nuoro did this dozens of times a day without thinking about it. Can you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single comment, and your answer genuinely shapes which protocol I decode next.